Okay, in the last video, we looked at what a user experience is and the various planes that you can control to deliver that experience all the way from strategy to surface. In this video, I want to talk about the 5 competencies or skills of user experience design that help us make decisions that contribute to those planes and deliver the experience that we want. They are information architecture, interaction design, usability engineering, prototype engineering, and visual design. In this video, I'm very briefly going to go over them. We'll look at these in detail each week. So information architecture will start this week in another video for this week. Then we'll do interaction design and so on. So I'm not going to spend too much time hammering into all of these because we're going to get to each of them. And also because I think this basic overview gives a pretty good detailed description of what all of these things are. So I'm more looking to provide a couple examples in this video rather than just read to you the same description that you can get from that reading. So the first thing is information, the first competency is information architecture. This is the skill of determining the structure of the data that is in an experience. In the dinosaur example from the last video, that data is like the data points about dinosaurs, what they ate, how old they are, you know, where they're from, how long ago they lived, all that stuff, and how the UI allows navigation through it. So this is the skill of figuring out how our experience is conceptually organized. So we're looking here at the structure plane. It's kind of somewhere between abstract and concrete. It's figuring out the concept behind how something is organized. So as an example, this is a screenshot from this course. And as the instructor, I have to do some information architecture design and figure out how I want this to be structured conceptually. It's less about like our things in boxes and more about, is this broken up by week or by topic? You know, picking an approach. And then if I do it by week, for example, then what do I put in each week? And then how do I group that? So what are the categories? We're going to do things by week instead of by topic. Inside each week, we're going to organize things by activity, so consuming and then doing, rather than like alphabetical or whatever else I could do. So I'll talk more about information architecture in the next video. Interaction design is the skill of researching user goals and understanding them and their motivation, and then from that determining the elements of an experience. I put page elements, but I guess in the example of the Children's Museum, it's not page elements, it's like physical elements, like which dinosaurs and activities, and then the presentation and flow. So in interaction design, we're figuring out really covers a pretty big chunk of the planes. It's strategy because it's goal and motivation oriented. We're trying to understand the goals, which are very abstract, but it also touches on scope, structure, and skeleton, because then we have to figure out what do people need to be able to do, what features and functions are there. If we have dinosaurs, you know, which ones and what do people do with them, and then structure and skeleton. So in an app design context, for example, here's some work that I did. I'm sorry, I had to blur it out because of an NDA, so it's just, I know it's not readable, but we're just figuring out on each screen what goes on it, right? What things go on each page, and then how do you get around to them? So this was me sketching it out just to learn, and then this was the final version that I put together. So you can see I'm defining on each of these screens what goes on it. You know, this one has a chart and some text underneath. This one has like an icon and some text, and then you can see where you can go from each one. So where do all the items on the page, in the scene, on screen, in the room, whatever, go, and then where can or should the user go from each of those? If it's the dinosaur exhibit, do you start with the super croc and then you go to the whole room, and then you're supposed to kind of go to the scene of dinosaurs, and then you're supposed to go to the fossil digging? You know, what is the order of these pieces? And another app example here, you can see I've just drawn out for this website where everything goes on a page, right? What goes on each page. The home page needs completely different things than the list of blog articles because the home page has different goals than the blog article page. So again, figuring out where do all of these things go is part of the interaction design. And then how do people get from thing to thing and from screen to screen? Visual design is probably the most obvious. It's the skill of applying aesthetics that support the interaction, information architecture, and usability. So research tells us that things that are perceived as being beautiful to look at are also seen as being easier to use and potentially better experiences. So visual design plays a role. It's sort of a supporting player that makes the usability seem better and can help the interaction and information architecture. It's obviously here in the surface level. It's the most concrete of all of our skills and concerns as a user experience designer. And just as an app example, the wireframes that I showed previously, I then had to apply the visuals to. So the questions I'm asking at this point are like, what color are buttons? What happens when you hover over a button? Does it change color? If so, to what? This page has to have logos on it. What do those logos look like? Does everything have rounded edges or square edges? What do these drop downs look like? What do illustrations, keeps going, fonts. So this is the very concrete visual aspect of it that you can point to and go, that's blank font, that's blank color, much less abstract than some of the other things that we're going to be looking at. And then a prototype engineering, which is the skill of making concepts real enough that we can have people use them and learn from that interaction. So it's a way of testing a lot of what we've seen already with real usage. And so that's going to cover usually strategy, scope, structure, and maybe a bit of skeleton. You often don't include surface elements in a prototype, but you can. A lot of times you actually start with prototypes that don't have the surface, and then you learn, and then as you learn, you start to include the surface. So maybe the surface should have kind of like a lighter red box around it, because prototypes can include the surface. But if you can only make one prototype for a project, you should make it earlier rather than later, which means you might not have the surface figured out yet. That's totally fine. Just as an example, this is a prototype I made using paper. You can see this graph, this like chart up in the top. I thought the chart was kind of confusing. I wasn't really sure if people would get it. So I made this paper prototype and I had people try to use it to kind of figure out, will people really understand this chart? So prototyping is all about learning. And then usability engineering, testing to see if the design is usable. So this is the skill of evaluating the usability of a design. And by usable, I mean that it helps the user really achieve their goals in a way that's easy, quick, and satisfying to them. So with usability, you tend to be working more in the skeleton and surface stage. You're presenting more of a finalized version and trying to understand if it's usable. And then just a quick screenshot of a usability test that I did. So you're asking questions like, can the users, this was a game, can the users learn the game mechanics? Games are supposed to be fun. Is this one fun? Did the people who usability tested it actually have fun? Did they understand how to win the game? Could they accurately use the controls on the screen? The controls are kind of tiny, so it wasn't really clear to me if people would be able to touch them, so I wanted to test that. And those are the 5 competencies of user experience design. We're going to jump into information architecture specifically next.